All right. So we are recording now. So thank you again to everyone for coming to today's Searching Like a Pro workshop. We're going to get started right away here. So as you can see, we have a lot of things on our agenda. So there's several things we want to cover. So we've kind of already done a bit of an introduction. So this session is going to be co-led by myself, Sarah, and my colleague Samuel. We are learning and instruction support librarians here at U of M. And then we want to kind of now get into all of the different things that you would need to know about searching like a pro as an undergraduate student. So there's some early steps that we're going to talk about. Then we're going to get into developing a search string. What is a search string? What pieces do you need to think through as you're developing one? And then kind of from there move into talking about using library search, which is the search engine on the library's homepage. How you would go about maybe citing some of the things that you find there, tips to keep in mind when you're citing, how to get help after today or kind of as you're moving through different assignments or in different courses. And then we want to save some time at the end if there's any final questions, but feel free during the session to leave some questions in the chat for us too, and we'll keep an eye on those. Okay, so by the end of this workshop, as Samuel and I were doing our planning, there were a few skills that we were hoping that you will be able to develop and use if you have assignments coming due very soon in the immediate future, or even kind of down the road in different courses, in different years of study. We're hoping that these are some of the skills that you'll be able to utilize and apply going forward. So knowing how to develop effective search terms, being able to understand the strengths and weaknesses of specific databases and search engines, being familiar with different searching strategies and how they can improve your results, being able to identify what peer review is and why it matters, and recognizing the benefits and drawbacks of citation generators, and also knowing how to create a citation from scratch. Okay, so on our agenda, one of those things near the beginning, one of our items was preliminary steps. So these are kind of our starting points. So when you first want to create a search for a research assignment that you have coming up, these are some of the things that are really helpful to think about right off the bat. So you want to start by looking at your assignment guidelines. And oftentimes here, there will be some clues for you about what you're being asked to look for, and that'll kind of help guide you in the searching process. So you want to think about what kinds of sources are you being asked to use. So are you looking for scholarly or peer-reviewed sources? And that's something that Samuel will talk more in depth about as we go forward. Are you asked to look for non-scholarly sources? How many sources are you being asked to find? Is there a range, 3 to 5 sources? Is it just one source? Is it use your textbook and then search for more sources? And where can you find all of these things? So for example, if you're looking for a non-scholarly source, you would look in a different place than you would if you need scholarly and peer-reviewed sources. So there's a lot of different things to kind of look for and think through before you even start searching. So what we have here is just a really quick example of what an assignment guideline might look like. Sometimes they're shorter or longer or include a lot of different elements, but this is just going to be an example that we're using for this workshop today. So I'm just going to read through it here for us. So this assignment focuses on climate change in Canada. Select an article from a scholarly journal that discusses the effects of climate change in the Canadian context. In approximately 250 words, summarize the main points raised by the author about the effects of climate change. Then, in approximately 500 words, provide your own evaluation of these points. Use at least 2 additional peer-reviewed articles to support your evaluation. Your article review should be written using APA style and must be submitted in Dropbox by 11:59 p.m. on March 6, 2023. Okay, so looking at your assignment guideline here, One thing that I recommend to students, and one thing that I did myself when I was a student, was highlighting important pieces of information. So for you, maybe when it's due, that's an important thing to keep in mind. Maybe you want to highlight that or underline that so it stands out to you. And then other things you might want to keep track of within your assignment guideline, and especially for this workshop, the purposes of what we're showing here is thinking through what it is that you're being asked to find. So there's a couple parts in these assignment guidelines that tell you exactly what you need to be focused on when you're searching. So if anyone wants to, in the chat here, give a response as to if this was your assignment guideline, what do you think you would need to find? And think back to those questions we had on that last slide about how many sources, scholarly sources or non-scholarly sources, and kind of what stands out to you based on what you're seeing here. Okay, so I'm not seeing any responses in the chat, but let's just move forward to the next slide here. Okay, so you can see here, there's a couple different places where the assignment guideline is talking about choosing resources to use in your assignment. So the first thing that you need to do is find one article from a scholarly journal that discusses the effects of climate change in the Canadian context. So that's step one. And then further down, you're asked to find at least 2 additional articles to support your evaluation. And the first time here, it says scholarly journal talking about finding an article there. And then in the second example, it says peer-reviewed articles, but whether something is scholarly or peer-reviewed in your assignment guidelines, oftentimes your instructors are referring to the same kind of content. So we would probably be looking in the same place for these kinds of sources. So that's something to keep in mind too. And one last question that sometimes comes up from students before we move on to our next slide here is, if you're asked to use a certain number of articles, does that mean that you are not allowed to use any more articles than that? And oftentimes instructors will say, just because I said use 3 articles, that doesn't mean that you can't use a 4th article if you want. So if it happens where you find an additional source that you think would be really helpful for your assignment, you can always ask your instructor or a TA if you can use those additional sources too. Okay. So another thing that comes up when students are looking through assignment guidelines and what they're asked to do research on is sometimes certain topics in university are really difficult to understand, especially when you're newer to university and maybe you're starting to take a lot of courses that deal with topics that are brand new to you. So what happens if you don't understand your research topic? So one strategy that can be really helpful for this, maybe you've already talked to your instructor or TA and gotten more information to kind of help you understand the basics, but beyond that, background reading is a strategy that I would highly recommend. So this might be opening up a textbook for your course and looking up a definition, or maybe there's a specific chapter in your textbook that deals with the topic you're being asked to write about. Maybe the way that the topic is mentioned in your assignment guidelines only talks about it in a specific way. So for example, the sample that we're using talks about climate change in a Canadian context. Maybe you want to see or learn more about climate change in other parts of the world and what's happening there. So maybe you want to look at some other sources that would provide different perspectives. And this might give you a more well-rounded understanding overall of what the topic is looking at and different things you might want to consider writing about or thinking about, searching for. And then the other thing you could do is just do a quick Google search on a really important term or the issue that you have to use for your assignment. And just by kind of doing quick searches or just looking something up quickly, doing a little bit of background reading, hopefully this will be enough to get you started and give you some ideas about how you could start to search on a certain topic and then eventually write about this topic if it's a writing assignment too. Okay, so one question that comes up a lot from students is, why not just use Google for finding articles, especially if you're doing background reading and you used Google to find a couple of sources through your background reading already? So there's a few different points that you can consider. So I've just listed out a couple here. There's definitely more, but these are a few things that I share with students when they come to me with questions like this. So first of all, Google has many different formats that might not be relevant. So on the assignment guideline example we looked at, you're asked to find information from scholarly journals, to find peer-reviewed articles. And Google has maybe a little bit of that, but it has a whole bunch of other things too. So you'll find websites and blogs, videos, news articles, and these are just a few types of formats. There are definitely other ones there too. So there's a lot of other kinds of information that you might need to sift through before you find the kind that would even be relevant for your assignment. Another reason that it might be more useful to search through the library's website is that certain content just won't show up on Google. And you'll find a lot more of it, and you'll find it a lot faster if you use something like a scholarly database, or you search through the library's website, which indexes a lot of information from scholarly databases. And then finally, one thing that Samuel will show you a little bit later in this workshop is how to go through the process of doing a search through the search engine on the library's website. And one of the things that's really helpful sometimes is there are a whole bunch of different ways to filter your search results. And so, for example, you could filter to only have peer-reviewed results, where when you're using something like Google, you don't have that kind of option. And there's a bunch of different ways to kind of organize your results and have certain things show up. And you don't have as many of those options when you're just searching in Google or even Google Scholar too. So you run into a lot of issues with not always finding the right information, not finding it fast enough. And when you search through the libraries or through a scholarly database, it alleviates a lot of those problems for you. Okay, so once you know the basics of what you need to find, you understand your topic, maybe you did a little bit of background reading and looked through your assignment guidelines, now would be a good time to kind of start thinking through what it is that you really want to search for and how you would go about doing that. So once you know the basics of what you need to find, you can start thinking about the question or the topic that you're going to be researching. So these are a few questions that I'll think about when I'm doing research on a topic or would recommend to students. And if you want, you can always write these down and then write in the answers for yourself, or it might just be something you think through in your head as you're going through the process of searching. So first of all, what is your research topic or your question? So in this case, based on our assignment guideline example, it would probably be something along the lines of, what are the effects of climate change in Canada? And then the next step here would be to address the second question. So from this research topic, what would be the most important terms? So in thinking through this piece, you would kind of probably want to identify just a couple of different words from your research topic, because your topic is probably going to be really long if it's part of your assignment guidelines. You wouldn't want to type an entire question into a database. So it's probably best to choose usually between 2 to 4 different terms. And then from there, we can put those words into a search engine, into a database, and it'll really help give us better results. So for example, if we had words like what or the in a search engine, it probably wouldn't really help us very much. But words like Canada, effects, and climate change, those ones are really important to our topic. It would be really hard to talk about climate change in Canada if we didn't have those exact words in our search. Okay, so the last thing to think about here, the third question, is can your terms be described in different ways? So for example, the word Canada, if you were specifically asked to search on information that has a Canadian context, we probably would use that one regardless. On the other hand, some of our other key terms like effects or climate change, there's other ways that those could potentially be described. So for example, effects, maybe a word like impact would also be helpful because it's a similar kind of word. Maybe instead of climate change, you could use a phrase like global warming. And it's hard for us to know right away which word an author would choose as they're writing an article or choosing a title for an article. So even though the third question here is a little bit of brainstorming, you don't always have to use those terms. It's nice to have them written out or just kind of think them through in your mind before you start searching. So then that way, if you try a search with climate change as a keyword and you don't get a lot of results, then you could immediately substitute global warming and see if your search changes and if you get better results. So it gives you more options in your search. Okay, so now we're going to go through some searching strategies together. So now that we have an idea of what to find, these strategies are going to come in handy. And they'll work really well when you're searching for information through the library's website or subject-specific databases. And you can use them for assignments you're working on now or kind of going forward in your studies in different levels of university and things like that. So they have really long-term use. Once you know them, you can use them over and over and over. And you can use these strategies as often or as little as you like. So with quotation marks, for example, you would only use them if you have multiple word phrases. So with a search term like Canada, we wouldn't need to put that in quotation marks because it's just one word. But if you have a term like social media, where it's always said in the same way, it's always described the same way, it's very unlikely that someone would say media of a social nature. That's a really good opportunity to use quotation marks because it tells the database those words must stay in the same order when you're searching. So I have here on the slide too, it's great for common phrases, brand names, companies, places, theories, organizations. You could even use quotation marks if you're looking for the title of a specific book or the name of a specific author or famous person, and it will always keep those words together in a particular order for you. Okay, so there are two more strategies. So the next one here is and is going to search for multiple terms together. So for example, if you wanted an article that talked about climate change specifically in Canada and a Canadian context, then you could write Canada, and then in capital letters, you could put and then climate change is a phrase. So we would probably put quotation marks around it. And that's how you could do a search for both of those things together. So all of your results that show up would have to include both of those things. It couldn't just be an article that talked about climate change in other parts of the world, but didn't mention Canada, or an article that talked about Canada and didn't mention climate change. Both of those pieces would have to show up. Okay, and then the third option here for searching strategies would be using the word or. So OR is going to tell a database to search for one concept or another. So this is really helpful back when we were thinking about concept mapping, and that third question that talked about, could any of your search terms be described in different ways? So some authors might use the phrase climate change, but other authors might say global warming. So in that case, you could just use the word or in capital letters between both of those terms, and it tells the database to search for either of those words. So if an article talks about both of them, it'll show up. If an article just mentions global warming or just mentions climate change, those articles will show up too. So it will give you more results that could be useful for your assignment. And you can see here in the last example, this one is a little bit more advanced, but another way that you could search on this topic is keeping Canada in your search, because that's important according to the assignment guidelines. And then you could write and then in brackets put climate change or global warming. And so this way, you're telling the database that as long as an article talks about Canada and also talks about either climate change or global warming, you want that information to show up, and any of that information would be helpful for you. So that's another strategy you can use if you're doing a search and you want to get more results, or you think people might be talking about a topic in different ways. So just something to keep in mind. And with and or with quotation marks, you can use all of these as many times as you like. So you could even have Canada and climate change and effects if you want. It might be appropriate sometimes to only use one or the other. So searching is not meant to be perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect search, but all of these are tools that are designed to help you be a little bit more mindful about your searching and kind of guide your results a little bit more. So the more you use them, the more intuitive searching will be. And so I would strongly encourage you to start using these. And so the next part of our presentation is going to focus on, now that you know how to design a search, where would you want to search for information and what would that process look like? So I'm going to turn it over to Samuel to talk about those things.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Sarah. So we are going to go to the University of Manitoba Library's website, and I'll do a demo search with you. And we're just going to use the general library search here. Since some of you are in upper years, you can also use specific databases that just have more focused content. But for the demo, we'll use this. So as my search, I'll just put in that last search that Sarah had on the screen. So Canada and climate change, or global warming. And we get our search results. And I'm going to say, since the people in this workshop are more advanced, if you have any questions beyond what I'm going to go over, what I'm going over is fairly basic, fairly introductory. So feel free to ask any of the more complex questions you have at any point along the way. So I just want to clarify some things first off with what you're seeing. So just like Google, what you get from a library search is a ranked list of results. The difference is that these are all items that are within the library's holdings. So you're going to have access by being a student to all of these items. And they are more likely to be scholarly, like Sarah was saying, than a Google search will be. So each result is going to give you very basic information to start with. It's going to, at the top, give you the type of resource it is. So this one is a journal article, book, journal article. Most of them are going to be one of those two things, but there are also things like book reviews that you need to keep your eye out for to make sure that you're actually getting a scholarly source, because while an academic book is a scholarly source, a book review tends not to be. So you have the type of source and then just the title, publisher, author, year of publication, and then these three options. So if you have a need to access any material that you find in a library search in another format, if for some reason maybe it's a print material and you need a digital version of it so that it's easier for you to read, you can click on this and it will link you to a form to fill out, and a library staff will try and get you a different format. There's also, for physical items, it's going to tell you where the physical item is located. So this one is at Elizabeth Defoe Library, and then it will tell you its call number, which you can bring to a library staff if you're not familiar with call numbers, and they'll help you find where it is. But there's also this option to map it, and that will show you where in the library this little red map icon will show you where it is. So directions proceed to the first floor, and then it's in the government documents collection, row 40A, with this call number. For something that has online access, what you'll see instead of that is full text available, and this will bring you to a specific part of the library record where you can get full text access, and we'll look at that in a second. Another important thing to look at just from this preliminary search is whether or not this icon is going to show up, this peer-reviewed icon with a book and an eye over it. What this tells you is that the item came from a peer-reviewed journal. Again, it doesn't necessarily tell you that it is peer-reviewed itself, because just like magazines, where there will be interviews and advertisements and editorials, journals also publish articles and editorials and book reviews. So every now and again, the computer will tag something as peer review, but you have to check and make sure, is this actually an article? In almost every case it will be, but it's always good to check. So if you're looking through this and you're not finding things that are specific enough to your search, what you can do is filter in a number of different ways. The most useful tends to be this full text online, because it will show you everything you have immediate access to. And then peer-reviewed. And again, to make sure you're getting a peer-reviewed article under resource type, what this will do is just limit, it'll take out everything that isn't a journal article from your search. If you're doing a search and you don't need to limit to one specific type of resource, but you are getting maybe a bunch of book reviews or conference proceedings, you can actually also go to the right, and instead of clicking on the left, it'll include something in your search. On the right, it will exclude that from your search. So I won't do it now because all I'm looking for is articles, but just so you're aware of that. And then something that's very useful if you're in the sciences, less so in the humanities, but it depends on, on your specific assignment guideline, is you can actually give it a date range. So if you're looking at a topic that's very modern, but maybe some of the words were used 100 years ago to mean different things, you can just limit it and say, I only want things from the last 3 years. And that's going to easily clean up your search results. The rest of these I won't go into now because they tend to be a bit more finicky. But if we look and we apply these filters, you can see before this, we had about 16,000 results, and we're down to about 8,000 results now. So that's that. And then if we go into an article, into any library resource, the very top is just going to be the exact same thing that we saw in the library search. And then as we move down, these are just a list of commands to help you save this item for later. And we won't go into those now, except for this citation button. What this is a built-in citation generator. But you need to be wary not only of this one, because this is quite a good generator. It's built into our library search engine, so it's meant to be good. But any citation generator you get is going to get you about 80% of the way there. So this has the right structure for an APA citation, but there's generally one or two errors in the citation. So you always need to make sure before you submit something as part of an assignment that you go over it and actually look at a style guide or a tip sheet that we have at the library to make sure that the format is matching correctly. And something I'll point out too is for APA, we're on the 7th edition, but actually for MLA in Chicago, if you're wanting those types of citations, these are the complete wrong edition. They haven't been updated yet by the library. So currently we're using MLA 9th edition, but this is still using the 8th. And we're currently on Chicago Turabian 17th, and this is still on the 16th. So just to be aware of that. This, if you click the green full text available on the original, so if we go back here and we just go straight to full text available, well, maybe now that I've played with it a bit, it's not going to do it, but it should bring you directly to this. And what this is showing is that I have 3 different options to view this item. So 3 different databases. And oftentimes, maybe one of the databases is having a technical issue. I would suggest going to the 2nd or 3rd and making sure that it's not an issue with that one database before giving up entirely. And of course, you can also reach out if you're having issues connecting to a resource. You can reach out to the Ask Us chat, which is a live chat staffed by library staff, which is really good for quick answers. So I'll show you just what it tends to look like. When you're on campus, you should not need to log in. It should understand where you are and bring you. Yeah. So it should bring you directly to the article. And you have options here to download or just view online. If we keep going down, this item does also have physical access, so it's going to tell you where the physical access is. But what it's actually telling you, this is a journal article at the top. And let's see, it's published in 2021. This is telling you that we have the journal itself, but not every issue. So you need to look at the date ranges. And what you'll see here is that we actually only have 1998 to 2003. So we don't have the specific article that this record is showing, which is from 2021 in the library. So it's always good to check that. If you keep scrolling down, you're going to get more specific details of what was said at the top, but just clearer and with more information. And most of this tends not to be useful unless you're looking for information for how to cite an item. But something that's great is, and this one you can see has tons of them, is subject headings. What you can use these for is if you are searching on a topic and you find maybe 1 or 2 articles, but you need 3 or 4 more, you can look at what other types of terms are they using and maybe add those into your search string, and it might get you some more items. It's important though not to just take any item. You have to think about it. So drought, you can try adding that and see maybe that's a specific effect that there's articles written about Canadian climate change drought. So effects, the drought would be one of the effects for Canadian climate change. But earth sciences is just too broad of a subject heading. It's probably not going to give you much. So it's important to look through these and think critically about which to include and exclude from your search. And then the next thing is at the bottom, you're going to have a short description. And when you're looking at a journal article, the description is going to be the abstract of that article. So if you're maybe signing in from off campus and you don't want to go through every single time, you want to just briefly read an article to see if you even want to read the whole thing and include it in your assignment, you would have to sign into your library account and then click through these and go through each interface. You can just read through the abstract here and then decide whether you want to continue with that item or not. It is important to remember professors really tend to harp on this, is you cannot just cite an abstract. This is good as something to look at and see if you want to read the entire article, but this is not enough to actually use in an assignment. And then the last thing I want to talk about with the library record is a lot of journal articles will have this option at the bottom. And what this is doing, it's a tool for citation tracking. So what Sarah talked you through and what I've been talking you through so far is what's called a keyword search, where we think of the most important concepts about a topic, and then we search with those keywords for items, articles that have used those words. Another option is once you've found an article that you like, that you think is good for your assignment, and you've evaluated it and it's good to go, is look through the references that they are using in their assignment, in their article, and see if any of those would be relevant to your topic as well. And what this is going to do is just give you, instead of having to look through the references yourself and manually search those titles and see if we have those, you can just click and see these are articles that the library has access to that are citing that paper. And there's two options for citation tracking. There's cited in this, which is backwards tracking. It's saying, what did this article cite on the same topic? And then there's citing this, which is forward. So what articles, since this has been published, have decided to use this as a reference? And this is also good to check when you are evaluating an item to see how many people think this is good enough that they wanted to cite it and use it as evidence for their own work. Not every item, it's important to note, is going to have that. So most journal articles will, but you see this one has the cited in this, the backwards tracking, but it does not have the forwards tracking. And it tends to be the more science-based, although there are things in the humanities and social sciences too that will have these, but science-based articles are the most often that have this option. And you can see as well on the normal, the initial search result page, each result will have these same icons for forwards, backwards, citation. And then these two I do want to mention here at the end. A permalink, what this is going to do is it's going to give you a link that you can copy, and then you can paste this I'll just click there. You can paste this maybe into the bottom of your assignment, and what it will do is bring you back to this result in the library page, and then you can click through to the item yourself. Another easy way is if you have signed in, and I'll just go ahead and do this. If you have signed into your library account, you can pin any item, and that will add it to your favorites. And then later on, you can go, say you've done a search and really quickly, you just have a few minutes between classes and you decide that you want these 3 items. You can go to your library account, to your saved items, and there they are. So you don't have to redo the search every time you are wanting to do research on this topic. And you can also label them by class. So if you're doing this for 3 different classes at the same time, you can label them with each class name, so that you're not having to filter through them. If you don't have time to look through each item, you can also save the query. So if you've come up with some long convoluted search string and you don't want to think of it a second time, you can just click Save Query and it'll do the same thing for you. Yeah, so if there aren't any other questions on searching, I'll give it a few minutes maybe just to see. I know that was a lot all at once, but if you have anything else you'd like to know, I can do a quick example here. Okay, I will move ahead, but if you have any questions, just put it in the chat. So back to the presentation. Just quickly, I wanted to explain the term peer review because a lot of times professors will just say it and move on and expect you to figure it out yourself or already know what it means. So the term peer review is fairly self-explanatory. It refers to a process that academic articles go through before they are allowed to be published in an academic journal. And what happens is an author submits their finished paper to a journal. The editor of that journal hands it off to other experts in the field. And those experts read through it and critique it and say, you know, these are all right, but this point doesn't make any sense, or the way you've done this needs to be clarified. And they will either, if there are too many issues, they'll say it's just not good enough, we're not publishing it. If there are a couple of issues, but it's mostly a good paper, they hand it back and say, give it some edits, bring it up to what we say are the standards of the journal, and we'll give it another shot. And then at some point, the decision is made either to accept it or reject it. And this is really important when it comes to evaluating sources for your assignments too, because the peer review process kind of lends it some credence, and that you don't need to do quite as much evaluating when you know that you're working with peer-reviewed resources. But it's important to note before I continue that a lot of professors will say scholarly, and what they mean is peer-reviewed. And a lot of professors will say peer-reviewed, and what they mean is scholarly. So they do overlap quite a bit, but peer-reviewed is only referring to peer-reviewed articles. That is the only item that is ever actually peer-reviewed. But there's a wider range of scholarly items, such as academic books. Say you write a book on an academic process or subject, and you submit it to the University of Manitoba Press and get it published. Sorry, I'm not sure why it just backed out there. That is a scholarly work, but it does not go through the peer review process. So I always suggest that you talk to your professor when they say one of those terms and clarify, because even in first year classes, I've spoken to professors and they say you need peer review, but they're okay with books too, which aren't technically peer review, but for them it's fine. And some will say scholarly, and you give them a book as a reference and they say, no, I want peer reviewed. So it's good just to double check with professors. So once you have found your resources and decided that they fit for your assignment, it's important to evaluate them and make sure that they're really quality resources that will bolster your arguments. And there's a really quick test that you can go through called the CRAP test, which stands for currency, relevancy, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So for each of these 5, just quickly think about the article that you have and think currency. How recently was it published or updated? How current are these sources that the author cites? And then are there any, if there are links in the text of the article, how many broken links are there? This, again, depends on what faculty you're in. Generally, if you're in classics, they don't care as much how old an item is, whereas in the sciences, maybe 5 years is too old. Maybe you need something from last year. This also depends on what kind of paper you're writing or what kind of assignment you're doing. Maybe you need older articles and sources. And in those cases, it's also important to think about the timeline of resources you're using. Relevancy, you should have probably already figured this out by the time you get to evaluating a resource. Once you've done a search and looked through the abstract, looked through the article, it's very simple. Does the information relate to the topic and help you answer your question? Authority, who is the author? What is their background? Are they affiliated with any professional organizations? Are they recognized as an expert in the area? This can get kind of tricky. Generally with articles, there will be a bio either at the beginning or the end, but some journals don't include that. And that biography will tell you this person is a faculty member at this university. They've been studying this, this is a major focus of research for them. And that kind of gives them authority. But again, this is where peer review comes in, because if you've submitted and been cleared by peer review, then you are kind of given the authority of the journal that you're publishing in. Accuracy has a similar relationship with peer review. Generally, peer-reviewed journals aren't going to let inaccurate research be published in their journals. But even with peer-reviewed articles, it's important to just look through and think about how thorough was this research, what arguments are they making, and do those arguments hold up with what you know about the subject? And then purpose. This is one of the major things with peer review. A peer-reviewed journal article the purpose is going to be to inform. This gets more murky if you start working with things outside of the academic realm, like gray literature or news articles. There are things like news articles, corporate reports, government reports, even personal communications. When someone wrote this, what was their intention, and did they make that intention clear? But if you're ever unclear about this, I would say, even after going through the CRAP test, make sure and check with your professor or your TA, or come to a librarian and have a discussion about your work. Once you have found your resources, you've evaluated them, you've decided, yes, I'm definitely going to use this in my work, and you have it, you need to make sure that you have a citation for it. And the most basic reason for this is because as an academic, it's part of the rules. You have to cite. If you use someone else's work without citing them as a reference, then you are engaging in academic misconduct. But even beyond that, it also shows that you have a knowledge of other scholars and work on the topic. So to your professor, when they're reading your work, if you're just saying all of your own ideas and you haven't referenced anybody else, it doesn't carry much weight because it's just your thoughts on the subject. You kind of need to engage with the other scholarship that has happened in a topic, and that reinforces your own argument and lends credibility to your paper. It also helps your readers. Say you end up deciding to publish in a student journal or even a professional journal. The citations help readers who are interested in your topic find those same resources and concepts that you did. And then since people said that they were pretty comfortable with this, I'm not going to labor on it too much, but basically different faculties, different fields of study will have different styles of creating references. But I want you to see APA, MLA, Chicago are the three major styles, other than scientific styles have their kind of separate world. I just wanted people to be able to see that all three of them, when you line them up, are asking for the same thing. They're just in slightly different formats. So they're all asking for the name of the author. They're all asking for the year of publication. It's just at the beginning in APA and at the end for MLA in Chicago. And then they're all asking for the title of the article, the title of the journal, the volume number, issue number, specific pages, and the DOI. So a lot of people tend to freak out when they've been working in one citation style and suddenly a professor says, no, I need another. But it's important to remember it's the same information, it's just a slightly different style. And the best thing is not to worry about memorizing any of this. Just go to the citation guide or the style guide each time you need it. And it's the same with in-text citations. So with APA, it's last name, comma, year within a parentheses in the text, or you can use the author's name in the sentence and then just add the year in the parentheses or brackets. And then if you're quoting a specific words that someone has said, the exact quotation, you do need to use quotation marks and then include the specific pages. MLA is similar, except instead of last name year, it's just last name pages. Chicago is the one that's a little different because instead of an in-text citation with the actual information, you just get that footnote, and then at the bottom of the page, you're asked to recreate your reference. Before we end, I just wanted to go with two of the major resources that can help you with this. Subject guides, since most of the people here are in later years, I'm assuming that you're taking courses with more specific subject. So the libraries have created subject guides for every topic and every field of study at the university. And what these are going to have, and you can see even with art history, there's a bunch of different, even more specific guides. So for general art history, you're going to have guides on how to research art specifically, looking through articles, how to cite images and find images. And then it's also on the homepage of every subject guide is the contact information for your subject librarian. There's also a specific librarian tasked with helping students from each faculty. And it's really helpful even if you know what you're searching for, but you're wanting to find the best possible resources, or you're having trouble with any aspect of the research process, librarians are happy to book an appointment with you and sit down one-on-one and have a discussion about that. Or if you don't have time for an appointment, you can email back and forth. And I would say it's best to just bookmark these pages so that you have them for later. I will go through and show you without a direct link. You can also find them just by going to the University of Manitoba Library's main page and coming down to help and subject guides, and that gets you to that same page we were just on. And then learn at the libraries. Similarly, if you have the direct link, I would say just bookmark that. But I will show you how to get there. So it's the same page. You go to the home page and then help and subject guides, but you just go a little farther down and there's this extra page for learn at the libraries. And what this is a specific guide through what we've been talking about today. The writing process, and what's important in each aspect of that, the searching process, evaluating, and then reference and citation. So it's going to have guides explaining peer review, types of sources, ways to get support, and then it's the same throughout here. And probably the most useful I've found is the citation guide, because it has guides for a bunch of different styles, and then it also links you to even more resources. So for APA, we have the APA manual. We have a handout that we have created here at the libraries that walks you through and gives you examples and formats for citations. And then we have examples here for you to check your work against. So this is a page I would definitely suggest bookmarking. And with that, I think I'm done with my section. So I welcome any questions. And I will say we have this link for evaluations for this workshop. If there's anything that you liked or didn't like, it's a very short evaluation, just about 5 questions. And that'll help us moving forward with these workshops. So I will stop recording.